So thank you, Phil, for joining us today for this short and sweet interview, just to find out a little bit more about you and get your thoughts. So first of all, Phil, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, where you are now, your background, that kind of thing?
Yeah, of course. So I am currently the Chief Executive of Energy and Utility Skills. We're an organisation that serves the needs of the power, gas, and water and waste industries in the UK. We are a membership organisation. We also provide a number of services to those members, and we're also a recognised and regulated endpoint assessment organisation, having recently achieved that status. And I've been Chief Exec now for a little over 7 months. Before that, I was an Executive Director in Ofqual, the Qualifications and Assessment Regulator, for some 6 years, and looking further back, I had a 30-year career in the Royal Air Force, so a varied career, and certainly one that changed quite markedly around about half a dozen years ago.
No, fantastic. And I mean, like you say, 30 years in the Air Force and the Armed Forces. What was it about the awarding sector then that tempted you in after all those years of on that side of things?
It's a good question. One that, to be fair, I'm asked quite often. It seems quite an odd jump. But I think if you reflect on the RAF, it is very much an organisation that grows its own. So, you know, joining at quite a young age, way back in the 80s, you know, I was quite struck at an early stage about how diverse an organisation it was. We were then and still are a really strong champion of apprenticeships and vocational and technical qualifications particularly. And the Air Force, I think, is rightly proud that it has a really strong track record of through-life training and skills development with its people. And in the military, as I'm sure you're aware, when you reach a particular age, you face a relatively young retirement age. So for me, it was an obvious point in my life to say, well, having had a fantastic career, and I loved every single minute of being in the Royal Air Force, where do I want to go? And I had a real strong commitment and passion for skills and training, and I looked for an organisation that would allow me to continue that. And dare I say it, my interest in qualifications particularly was heightened by the fact that both my son and my daughter went through GCSEs and then A-levels. So I took, as most parents do, a keen personal interest in their studies. And I learned quite a lot from that about the delivery side of GCSEs and A-levels. And therefore, when an opportunity came up in the qualifications regulator, it just seemed to be a great opportunity to get into an organisation that touched very many different parts of qualifications and assessments. So I leapt at the chance back in 2015, early 2015.
Wow. And how was it sort of starting in Ofqual? Did you find it a massive change from sort of what you'd been used to, or did you find it quite an easy skills transfer?
I think people would have expected, I guess, that going from the military to what is actually the civil service would be a major change, but it wasn't. Certainly in the military, we work really closely with the civil service, and I have done for many years, so that wasn't a surprise. I think there is this sense, there's almost this urban myth that military people tend to be quite command and control in terms of their management style, but I guess nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, I reflected to a friend just recently that if you're expecting to run an organisation and put people genuinely in harm's way, then whatever plan you come up with, you best make sure that plan is built with your team, because it will be the team that are going to deliver that plan. So, I think people would be probably quite surprised at how collegiate and collaborative the planning and the teamwork is in the military, and that translated really well across to the sector. What I would say, though, having moved from a leadership role where I was in charge of an organisation of 6,000 people across 3 countries, and then moving to an organisation where I had a team of 5. I mean, it is different in scale, of course. The military has a scale all of itself, but many of the skills are very, very similar in terms of how you manage people. The one thing I would say, that the big lesson that I learned, and I'm so pleased I did, is that I considered the first year in the sector very much as my own apprenticeship in assessment and qualifications. I didn't join as a chief executive. I didn't join as an executive director. I joined as a director. And I worked super hard over an extended period to understand as much as I could about assessment, qualification design, and regulation. And my sense, certainly from my perspective, is that it would be quite difficult to join in at the top of an organisation that is relatively specialist in this field. And I think for me, it's about organisations bringing in talent and helping that talent to grow and understand the business. And that was a really important learning phase for me. But looking back on that now, the sort of 6-year journey I've been on, I just couldn't do the job I'm doing now, nor the one I did previously in Ofqual, without that experience of really getting under the skin of assessment and regulation and understanding it from first principles. I would highly recommend that.
No, good advice, definitely, I think there. And, you mentioned sort of the challenges that you faced, sort of going in from while in the military and then to Ofqual and then obviously current role. So based on all of these experiences, especially your ones at Ofqual and now CEO of an EPAO, what would you say are sort of the key challenges facing the awarding sector as a whole at the moment, or at least from your side of things?
It's a good question, and one that obviously I wouldn't say keeps me awake at night, but focuses my attention on a regular basis. I think without overlooking the obvious first one, which would be the impact of COVID, and the impact is present and will be with us for a long time. Now, I wouldn't underestimate the impact on not just the current learners, but those to come. The amount of lost teaching and learning is substantial. So I think the first thing I would say is that the system needs to consider its approach to qualifications and assessment, both for the current cohort that will graduate this year, but of course the ones that will follow. And it presents, in a technical sense, all sorts of challenges around consistency and comparability between students that have had differing levels of exposure to teaching and learning. So I think that there's a systemic question. And I think what I would say there is it's important to think of qualifications as part of a system, not the whole system in and of itself. Certainly when it comes to academic qualifications, it's part of a school system, and you can't solve all of the problems just through qualification delivery. So I think understanding how qualifications fit within the bigger picture is really important. I think more broadly that there are some really interesting challenges around government policy initiatives. For me, there's a massive opportunity rather than a challenge around the government. I'm not in the sector I'm in by accident. It was selected because energy and utilities for me is where so much exciting and interesting things are going to happen. The whole industrial green revolution, Boris Johnson's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution, the energy white paper. You can list any number of government policies that all point to skills development to deliver net zero and a sustainable future. It's really exciting. For me, the challenge for awarding organisations in my position will be making sure that ambitious policy objective docks with the equally ambitious changes to vocational technical qualifications, which will see, I think, a welcome change to that suite of qualifications, and synthesising all of that such that the employer's needs to upskill their existing workforce and subsequently generate the employers of the future is all consistent and coherent. So that on one hand is a challenge because there are many big moving parts, but for me, a huge opportunity to be in the heart of, I think, a really exciting time for both qualifications and for the country.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think, as you say, especially energy and anything along that, it's such an interesting field, and so many young people, I think, are keen to move into that as well. And vocational in general, with T-levels, apprenticeships, everything else, it's going to be one of, I think, the key pathways going forward, and maybe even overtake sort of your academic routes as well for the first time in a long
while. What I would say, I would declare that I am a strong supporter of the broad thrust of government policy around making vocational technical qualifications as highly valued and highly regarded as their academic equivalent. I think it's so important, and I would like to think in years to come that a parent would genuinely say you have a choice between A-levels and T-levels, and they're equally valid and they're equally high quality and they'll equally lead to brilliant careers. And I think if we can achieve that, and of course the suite of apprenticeships that sit alongside T-levels, then I think we'll have done well.
Yeah, Absolutely. So as obviously a sector that is all around, sort of championing future careers and aspirations for not just young people, but people at any age in terms of being able to do a qualification or assessment, what do you think the sector itself, so the awarding sector, endpoint assessment, that kind of thing, could be doing to attract fresh talent into awarding bodies themselves, or encourage people like yourself to transfer their skills across? Because at the moment, you sort of see sort of that steady progression upwards, but you never really have people at A level or GCSE sort of say, when I grow up I want to be an assessment designer or a qualification developer, that kind of thing.
I think that would be true of very many sectors, and it is quite a tricky one. And what I would say, the energy and utility sector faces a real challenge around diversity and inclusion. And we're looking at what we can do to solve some of those problems. I'm not sure that's necessarily true of the awarding industry, but I would imagine there are some similar parallels one could draw. I guess for me, it's about trying to be a bit bolder and a bit braver with some of your appointments. For me, I would say that the organisation that hired me straight from the military recognised the fact that I had many skills that were transferable, but I didn't have deep expertise in the sector. There was I think a genuine reflection on both sides that I would have to work extraordinarily hard in the first year to pick some of that knowledge up, and that the organisation would understand that there would be a development period while I did that. And I think that was true of my current role. I've joined energy and utility skills with, I think, now quite a deep understanding of skills assessment and qualifications, and none about energy utilities. And again, I'm immersed in everything energy and utilities to get that part of my skill set up to speed. So I think for organisations looking to broaden their diversity, their inclusion, and their skill sets, I think have a think about what really, really matters in terms of cultural fit to your organisation and the degree to which candidates can actually learn bits of the trade that they haven't necessarily got. I think it will be really important to bring talent in at the higher stages of the organisation rather than growing from grassroots. But I wouldn't overlook the importance of growing from grassroots. I was speaking to the Federation of Awarding Bodies just a couple of weeks ago, saying, to my mind, it would be fantastic if the sector could generate an apprenticeship around assessment expertise. Not someone that goes out and assesses, but someone that designs and develops assessments. It's such a core skill, and one that is really quite rare to find. Why wouldn't the sector work together to identify that solution and build it itself? It's something where we could take it into our own hands and develop. Seems really exciting as an opportunity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. And I think it is something that they are looking at, aren't they? Because it seems almost daft to have a whole industry focused on assessment and apprenticeships and not actually run one themselves in that sense. So no, I agree. And then obviously on the flip side to your operations role and your CEO role, you're also a member of several boards. And obviously, we do a lot of board recruitment, and obviously we can sort of sell the advantages of it. But I guess from your side of things, what are the advantages of taking on a trustee position? When you've already got a busy day job with everything else that you do and everything else that you're learning, and why would you sort of encourage others to do that, maybe at a high level part of their career?
I guess it depends on what someone wants out of life. There are two reasons, I think, for taking on a board position, or maybe three if you stretch it a little bit. I think the first one would be to further round your own skill set. Many people have worked with boards, fewer people have worked on boards, and they are clearly different. And my experience of being a chief executive now for 8 months, I am, I believe, far more effective as chief executive having worked on a board and understanding how a board relates to an organisation and reacts to an organisation. So I understand far better as a board member how you would want information to be presented, how you want to manage risk as a board, and how the board functions. And it allows me to engage with the board as a chief executive far more effectively. So I've found it very straightforward to build the right relationships with the board and understand how a board ticks, having been on the other side of that fence, if you like. I cannot underestimate how important and valuable that experience has been in terms of personal development to allow me to be effective as a chief executive. I genuinely don't think I would have been as effective without that experience. So So that feels a bit like a sales pitch to being a board member, but I think it's really important if you want to be an effective chief executive to have that experience. It's invaluable. I think the second reason, of course, is because boards perform a really important function in and of themselves. I'm quite proud to be a board member of the Independent Schools Inspectorate, and I think I chose that because it matters. What that particular organisation does matters deeply, and therefore, finding a board position that meets your personal development needs and is something you care deeply about, I think, is really important too. And I think that builds on that third point. And I'm also a trustee of an awarding organisation where I try to give as much as I can to that organisation of my experience in regulation, but get a lot too in terms of how different organisations work, how they're constructed, and how they tackle problems. So you learn from others as well. So in summary, I would say it's really important. If you want to be an effective chief executive, I've seen it from the other side. It allows you to pursue some areas that you wouldn't necessarily do in your working day-to-day life, where you have a passion to make a difference, and it allows you to see different practice and learn from that too.
Fantastic. No, I agree with you. They're all the kind of things that we say, and I think that personal development thing is massive. Being able to look at things in a whole organisational strategic way is imperative for sort of going into those director CEO roles, aren't they, sort of going forward. So yeah. So finally, Phil, big question to end with, so no pressure. You have already achieved such a huge amount in your career, both in the military and in the last 6 years sort of coming out of there. What are you hoping to have an impact on going forward?
I'm in my current role by design rather than accident. I spent 6 years in Ofqual, and I think got the vocational and technical side of regulation into a pretty good place as I left the organisation. And I left for a very specific purpose, which was having been immersed in government policy around T-levels, apprenticeships, and all of the qualification reviews. I feel as if they're in the right place and heading in the right direction. And I joined a sector where, back to my practical days of the military, where I could actually make these happen on the ground. So my ambitions for the next 5 years or so would be that the energy and utilities sector steps up and meets government ambitions around net zero, climate change, and all of those really big global challenges through the development of a really agile skills program that effectively uses the tools that government are providing and turns them into practice and actually develops the skills needed by this particular such an important sector to meet government ambitions. So there's a lot in all of that, but I guess but at heart, having worked hard on the sort of development of the policy framework for skills, I'm really keen to now get involved in the delivery of that in a key government policy area. No,
fantastic. So no small ambitions then?
Never small in ambition. We'll come back to you in a couple of years and see if I've got some.
No, that's great. Well, Phil, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. We'll be continuing this series shortly with another episode, details to come soon. But if you've got any questions or you want to get in touch with either myself or Phil to explore any points further, then please do get in touch on the details below. All right, well, thank you so much, Phil, and we'll speak again soon.
Great to speak to you. Goodbye.
Bye.